In the next few minutes, we're going to take a look at a number of different brush presets as well as how we can use the brush settings in order to customize them. I'll start by opening a new file, just make it 7 by 5 and click Create. Then to zoom in, I'll use Command 1 on Mac, Control 1 on Windows. I'll tap the B key to select the brush tool. And in the Brushes panel, under Dry Media Brushes, let's start by using the Ultimate Pencil Hard Brush. I'm going to use the right bracket key to just enlarge it a little bit and then start painting. And you can see we get a very unique paint stroke. If we change to the charcoal pencil, again, a very unique paint stroke. And if we go to the pastel palooza, again, very unique. We can even select this ballpoint pen. And as I paint over the same area, we can see that something else is going on here. Well, the cool thing is, if we select any of these brush presets and we want to know how the brush is created, all we need to do is look at the brush settings. So I'm going to separate these two. I will dock the brush settings down here at the bottom, and we can see that this brush has wet edges, and that's what's actually causing that look, or at least part of that look. All right, let's take a look at some of these other brushes. I'm going to move to the wet media brushes. We've got this wet blender brush. Now, as I paint with it, it doesn't appear to be doing anything, but that's because it actually switched tools. I'm no longer on the brush tool. I'm actually using the smudge tool. And I know that not only because it selected the smudge tool, but it also has a little icon for it here in the brushes panel. So now if I paint near another area that has color, it will smudge those colors together. All right, we can use the Real Oils brush. Again, this is changing the tools. Now I'm using the mixer brush. And if we go back to something like the Impressionist blender, well, now again, we're smudging. I might want to get a little smaller brush there, and we can smudge over this area. All right, there's also some special effects brushes. Let me just scroll down here. There are some spatter brushes. These brushes are rather large, but they create kind of the spatter effect. There's some concept brushes. This one happens to use a brush tip that is in the shape of some leaves, and it scatters it and also varies its size as well as its rotation. And then if we look at the screen tone, that creates a very different looking brush that gives us the screen tone pattern. So again, if we find a brush preset that we like and we want to figure out how they got that effect, we can look down here in the brush settings. So for example, if I select texture, we can see this is the texture that's being used to create that screen tone. If I want to change it, I'll just click on the downward pointing triangle and I can select something like this green grass. And now we get a very different look to our brush. If we want to access some additional brushes, we can use the flyout menu here, and we can choose to get more brushes where we can access brushes online. All right, if we want to customize some brush settings, well, I'm going to return to a very simple brush for a moment. Under the general brushes, just this hard round brush. When I paint with it, that's the effect we get. But I can always come down to my brush settings and change the brush tip shape to something else. We can try this, that's a little bit different, or maybe this brush tip. We can also change the spacing. Sometimes it's easier to see what's happening when we change the spacing of the brush. I'll go ahead and select something maybe like this. All right, but again, changing that spacing, we can see that we actually have something that looks like this. All right, so I'm going to return to this one for a moment. I will increase the spacing. I'm also going to increase the size just a little bit. And let's take a look at some of these other options. There are shape dynamics. So if we want to jitter the size and have some of the shapes smaller and some of them larger, we can. We can also change their angle as well as their roundness. We can even scatter them, and we can choose to scatter them on a single or across both axes. So we get a little bit more sporadic, kind of random placement of each of those little points there in the brush. All right, let's go ahead and toggle those off, and let's take a look at something like color dynamics. Here we can change the hue, saturation, or brightness. I'll go ahead and change the brightness. And, let's return to the hard round brush. When I selected it and it was the preset, before I made changes, it was actually outlined in blue, but now I know I've made changes because it's outlined in orange. So I'll target that again, and then we'll have to enable those color dynamics. I'll increase the brightness jitter. And now, if I paint one stroke, we see that stroke in one color. But because I've got it to jitter, every time I paint, it's just going to jitter the brightness of my foreground color a little bit. Now, if I wanted that to happen on a per tip basis, I could go ahead and enable that. It gives me a rather interesting look. All right, I will toggle that off and also off the color dynamics, and we'll move to the transfer. Here's where I can control my opacity as well as the flow jitter if I wanted to. Let's really increase that opacity jitter. Now, as I paint within the stroke, it's actually going to change opacity. Might be a little difficult to see. I don't want you to be confused with the fact that I'm using a pressure sensitive tablet. So, I'll just draw a straight line, and there you can see the opacity jitter a little bit better. All right, another brush setting that I really like is this wet edges. I'll go ahead and paint, and when I paint over it, it almost looks like a little bit of like watercolor-ish look because the edges are wet. Now, before we wrap up, I just want to show you if you use the brushes panel and you load the legacy brushes, you're going to see a number of additional brush tip shapes. So as I scroll down, we'll see some tip shapes that look like brushes. These are actually natural media bristle tips. So you've got flat and round brushes where you can change all sorts of bristle qualities like the number of bristles and the length and the thickness and the stiffness. If I scroll down a little bit more and I select this, we actually have some brush tip shapes that have erodible tips, and you can again select from a variety of different options and even sharpen the tip as you paint. All right, I'll scroll down a little bit more, and here we have some airbrush tips with options for things like granularity and spatter size. If I just scoot over a little bit, we can see we can get some cool effects with these as well. All right, as you can see, there are a lot of controls available in the brush settings that are kind of beyond the scope of the essential training course. We'll touch on a few additional options in the next video, but if you want to know more, I would highly encourage you to take some time and just explore them on your own.